Okay, I love to do a little bit of stalking before I have somebody on the show. I stalk your social media already because I'm constantly pulling your stuff for our social toolkit. But here is something I found from you. Did I find this on, I can't remember if it was your Instagram or your YouTube, but you say this: the number one most overlooked rule for social media: when you find a post framework that works, reuse it. Tell us about that.
Sure, you're like, social media is not easy, right? Social media is challenging. And that's because it's this confluence of about, a dozen different factors that are all contributing to a post's success or failure. And so when you do stumble across something that your audience resonates with, perhaps even beyond your audience, you're getting more broad reach than you typically would on an average post. That means that, hey, I've figured out something here that people are enjoying. And so, we always say repeat the best, forget the rest, and continue to test. And so if you are publishing a type of content and something about it, you've tried it a couple of different times, you don't want to take too many conclusions off of one post, but you've published this type of post framework, two, three, four, five, it's just not hitting. It's okay to, forget that. When you do have a post framework that's doing really well, keep with it. So for instance, my own Instagram, I was experimenting with different types of carousels, big fan of carousels personally. And there was a really simple design that I did one time where the cover of this carousel was just a single colored background and then like big block text. Typically I've got like little graphic elements, little arrows, little scribbles. I've got maybe my face on there. I'm smiling. I'm doing a weird YouTube face. And then there's like the big title, the headline, the hook. I stripped all that away, just went plain background and hook, headline, nothing else. And those types of posts were resonating way more. And I don't know if it's because they were a little bit stripped down, so they seem a bit more authentic and less produced, and so people have their guard down a bit more. They're willing to engage. Who knows? That's kind of the point. You can have theories, but social is so complex that we never know for sure. But what I do know is that type of post framework works for me, so I keep going to it again and again. The final piece of that stanza, though, Heather, is continue to test. You always want to reserve a small amount of your social media content, your social media calendar for something that you haven't done before, because the type of content that you stumble upon that works really well, you only stumble upon that when you continue to test. And there was a time when I had never done carousel posts like that. And if I had never continued testing, I never would have stumbled upon that new winner.
I just had a question as I was listening to you. I was thinking about Instagram Lives. Do you ever do Instagram Lives? And do you think that those are an important tool to use?
Yeah, I think lives can play a really critical role in your Instagram strategy overall. My feeling with these types of things is establishing a sustainable rhythm and routine is what's most important on social. We call this no weeks off. And that is the prerequisite to seeing long term success on social. And success for you can mean anything, it can just mean connecting with people on the other side of the device, right? And so for me, I am doing carousel posts, I'm doing reels, I'm doing stories. And I don't yet have the bandwidth to add a live. And I wouldn't want to just do one live. So for me, if I was going to do that, the best practice is typically one live per week. And I don't yet have the bandwidth for that. But it's always something that you want to continue expanding upon. So if you are already crushing it on Instagram, kind of in all those other verticals, and you want to expand into a different content format, I think live is absolutely useful part of any toolkit for a creator.
How are you using your story? I used to love stories. I was super faithful with them, telling a story literally in my stories throughout the day. And then I just got super burned out from it. And now I just share my post to my story, which that's probably not a good thing to do. What are you doing in your stories?
Well, stories have really changed over the past few years. For a while, because they were that novel new feature on Instagram and other social platforms, it was the place where you could really like break through the noise and connect to people. And we have seen our responses go down. I used to get dozens of DMs a day in response to stories, and then it wasn't happening as much. And so you start to recognize there is, okay, it seems like maybe the wave is shifting a bit on social. And What I always tell, creators, or in my context, churches specifically, is you never want to like fight the wave. If you imagine standing in the ocean, if you try to go against the waves and they just keep crashing over you, over you, you lose. The waves will eventually knock you down. It's much smarter to just ride the wave than to fight against it. And so when we see these kind of global changes on social media, take note of them, and then I adjust accordingly. That being said, I do still find that really off the cuff content does elicit replies and responses on Instagram stories, just not to the same degree that it once did. And so, what I'm trying to do right now is continue to test on Instagram stories. So, yesterday, I was in Vermont last week, Christian boy autumn, enjoying a great time, and took a bunch of photos. So I did like a photo dump on my Instagram story. And I was like, okay, kind of seeing like, I don't usually do that type of thing. I'm not like a photo dump type of person. Big fan, but doesn't really align with my content strategy. But I was like, okay, if there's ever a place to do this, it's Instagram stories. It's going to expire in 24 hours. And along the same vein of continuing to test, one of the best things that you can do is test content in different formats where the stakes are lower. And stakes can't be lower than on a platform where the posts expire. So you got to kind of test something on Instagram stories, see how people are responding, and then maybe from there you move it over to a feed post. And if it does really well there, maybe then you move it over to a YouTube video, and you can kind of like graduate the content up the hierarchy, as it were.
I've never thought about this before, but now I'm wondering if maybe Instagram stories have changed because Instagram is now so vertical video, because now I'm seeing so many videos of people that I'm following. I don't feel the need as much to check their story to see a video. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. And that's also why on these multi format platforms now, which virtually every platform is, you have to kind of consider, if I'm going to publish to stories, how is it going to be distinct from the feed? And we have this rule in the church world, and we call it the 50% rule. And the point of that rule is for church-wide promotions, whether it be emails, but really specifically announcements. We try to tell churches, if your announcement does not apply to more than 50% of the congregation, it doesn't warrant a church-wide promotion. So it doesn't warrant a stage announcement on a Sunday if what you're talking about doesn't apply to at least 50% of the people. Doesn't mean 50% of the people have to actually attend, but is it relevant to them? Because what happens is, if you continue to make announcements over and over again that don't apply to the majority of people, then what you're doing is you're conditioning your congregation to tune you out. And then you ask, well, why does no one kind of like pay attention to our announcements? Well, you've basically indirectly told them that they're not relevant to them. So, same kind of principle to stories. If all we're ever doing is publishing promos to our feed posts, hey, come check the feed post. Eventually, we're going to condition our audiences, and I do this as well. It's like, okay, this is not relevant for me, and every algorithm on Instagram, and Maseri has come out and said this, is distinct. So the feed algorithm is different from the stories algorithm, which is different from the reels algorithm. But if all you're doing is promoting a different format on the multi-format platform, then you're not using stories for what it could be used for. And so I always try to consider, like, what am I going to do uniquely in this content format? And that kind of brings me back to live. We have a podcast that does question and answers already. So like live is typically like a Q&A, and it would be distinct because we're interacting back and forth in real time. But I already kind of do that on the podcast. So what am I going to do on live that's different from anything else? And the same is going for stories. I'm continuing to test right now and have a bunch of different things. And if you follow me, you'll probably see like a bunch of different things on Instagram stories as I'm kind of trying to throw stuff against the wall and seeing what is sticking in 2023 and 2024. Really looking forward to that.